Gisophian Philosophy. Lecture 0. The 10 Philosophical Tenets. Number 1. All animals are precious living beings of this earth and should be protected. Number 2. No intentional killing of any animals or person outside of self-defense. Number 3. No sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, etc. Bigotry based on immutable characteristics is always unacceptable. Number 4. One should actively help to preserve as much history as is possible. Intentional destruction of history is not condoned. Number 5. One should strive for universal love to all who do not actively bully or oppress you. Number 6. One should always seek to learn new information and expand their knowledge. Number 7. One should advocate for the preservation of sacred sites and texts from all faiths and communities. Number 8. One must always oppose offensive warfare and genocide. Number 9. One is always encouraged to volunteer and aid those in need in any way they can. Number 10. There is no such thing as perfection in life. Therefore, there is always room for improvement, and we should always strive to be even better than our predecessors. Lecture 1. A general overview of reality. The gods as we have traditionally and historically understood them do not exist. There are no individual divine beings beyond the universe who are capable of divine intervention. However, concepts affiliated with these figures do exist, and specifically exist beyond us, as fabric of the universe itself. Our gods are merely personifications of these aspects of the universe. Keep in mind, historically religion was on the cutting edge of how we understood the world around us. Thus, while all deities may not exist as autonomous humanoid beings, they do exist as concepts within the universe itself. We are unique in our ability to study and ponder the deep past in the world. No other life is comparable in this aspect. Thus, it is fair to deduce our natural destiny, so to speak, is to be caretakers and record-keepers of the universe. Intentionally or not, we were created as a way for the universe to understand itself. For our very material beings are the same as the universe around us. Life itself is a magical creation of the forces of the universe. The very concept of life spawning out of mere matter is profound and worth celebrating. The afterlife does not exist. Therefore, to take a life and snuff out that magic is an evil act, as is to unjustly oppress life in its blessed time in existence. It also makes preserving that history vital, for people who are dead can be kept alive in a way through memory, but history that is forgotten or destroyed is permanently lost. If we are to keep our ancestors and our own memories alive, we have a duty to record and preserve as much as is possible, in addition to studying the universe around us. We must overcome ourselves, the eventual expansion of the sun, and even the predicted end of the universe itself in billions upon billions of years from now. I worship the universe through the personification of my chosen gods for 3 reasons. First, the mortal mind has limitations we must acknowledge and work with. A concept of the god, so to speak, acts as a personification for what are sometimes very distant and impersonal concepts to help our mind comprehend the universe around us. Secondly, keeping ancient figures relevant in my life is a way of mine to put my respect for historical preservation into practice. Lastly, it connects me with some of my most distant ancestors, which on top of doubling down on preservation, demonstrates my love for things created in this world I inhabit. I don't deify a fictional heaven in the clouds, but rather the many lost yet very real ancient cities and civilizations. Since we all have one life that is far too short, it is of the utmost importance we fight for the quality of life of all beings. After all, nearly all suffering in the world can be tied to our own actions and/or a lack of knowledge. Therefore, over time it is entirely within our power to end all severe suffering. The natural world is a gift, the greatest gift in this life. Those who destroy it, particularly those who claim divine justification while doing so, should be opposed at every turn. Free will in this life is sacred. Those who restrict it are thus bringing death to the world. For freedom is something inherent and inseparable to life. We were all created as individuals for a reason. To eat other creatures is not inherently bad. However, putting beings into cages for eventual slaughter or bringing about a premature death is bad. For other creatures are alive too and have just as much of a right to enjoy this life to the fullest as the rest of us. Mass wealth accumulation is also bad, for in this society it gives one individual too much power to restrict the rights of life to other beings. Forcing things against the consent of others is also bad. No forced speech, sex, birth, etc. is ever acceptable. Thus, governments who demand blind loyalty are in violation of this. No being doing zero harm to others should ever be negatively bothered. When it comes to matters of identity, it's not your body, so mind your own business. It's their body and their choice. There are many correct answers to the nature of existence, in my opinion, throughout all religious and irreligious thinkers. However, I believe there is only one incorrect answer, that your God alone exists, but no others do. Far too many groups in history have used this to justify destroying what should be preserved. The one who says there are no gods is correct, as is the one who believes in many gods. But the one who says there is only one God, their own, is wrong. Lecture 2. Music, Consumption, and Borders. On music. Given how historic and potent music is in combination with the religions of the world and just emotions in general, I consider any group that prohibits music and/or singing to be nothing short of soulless. Music and the fact we enjoy it whatsoever is a fascinating phenomenon that should be embraced as part of our experience, regardless of your disposition on the reality or lack thereof when it comes to feeling something awesome from or in combination with music. One must concede those feelings are incredibly real to those who have experienced it. Someone far more educated than me on psychology or music theory could probably make a compelling argument that music is actually the most powerful tool we have access to. On consumption. Anyone who condones fasting but condemns all drug use is a hypocrite, and vice versa. Both are forms of disrespect to the health of your body, and both, in a religious context, ultimately serve the same function: to produce an altered state of mind, both of which these methods are well proven to do so. Additionally, all evidence suggests that offering adequate rehabilitative services with no possible legal punishment for use is the most effective way to counter widespread addiction. Therefore, any punishment for what you put in your own body whilst gifted with life is wrong. On borders. International borders are wrong. Economic history suggests less borders lead to more prosperity. In addition, physically isolating groups so close together only exacerbates tribalism and all of its negative effects. Also, can you think of a time in which the powers that be who ordered said barriers to be built ever exclusively built it themselves? No. The walls of a republic are not built by the senators. The walls of an empire aren't built by the entire royal family. Borders are a way for the autocracy to force labor out of those beneath them in the hierarchy. Folks who are always worse off for the constructions of these borders. Most importantly, it violates the rights of all creatures to free travel, which they evolved to partake in. It is very immoral to separate and put unjust pressures on these species merely due to our own arrogance and constant infighting. Wolves do not build stone walls when they fight other packs for territory. Birds don't separate entire peninsulas from the mainland when they see a rival flock. No other species destroys other life when they have interspecies conflict on a scale remotely comparable to us. Given this plethora of negative effects they have on all life, international borders are inherently bad and should be opposed at all turns. Lecture 3. Temple Conduct. Here is the ideal etiquette at a temple in my mind. For the priests and priestesses, they should be open to answering any questions in a friendly manner from all others. They should be fully transparent and honest at all times. They should also be responsible for the construction and planning of the temple. No creature should be knowingly killed as a result of the construction of any temple, nor should any tree be felled. The temple must be kept as safe as possible at all times, and a suborder of medical professionals should have an adequate area of the temple to treat any sick or injured who enters seeking care. All refugees should be welcomed and protected inside the temple grounds from all external punishment, with the only exception being cases of known murder or SA. Food, beds, and water should be available for all who come and need it. All creatures on the temple property must be fed and actively taken care of. No temple clergy may exclude people from membership for any of the following reasons. These include gender, sexuality, any physical characteristic whatsoever, neurodivergence, wealth, or homeland. Lastly, they are responsible for organizing all events at the temple, religious or secular. A universal rule amongst all ranks and guests is everyone should wash themselves before entering, if possible, of course, and wield the utmost respect when interacting with other living beings in any capacity on temple grounds. This includes using an inside voice as to not overwhelm the conversation of others or unjustly bother them in general. Practitioners are discouraged from keeping opinions and questions to themselves. They should be open to speaking up and talking with others rather than merely listening to the clergy without question. Practitioners are encouraged to bring friends of other faiths to the temple, and aggressive proselytizing is highly discouraged towards them. Lastly, practitioners are strongly encouraged to volunteer their time and/or label to any temple volunteering opportunities whenever they have the spare time and energy to do so. These opportunities are to be set up by the community of the practitioners themselves collectively. Guests are under the same rules as practitioners, with the only addition being that they are discouraged from disrupting rituals via speaking over said ritual, just purely due to the fact that they may not be familiar with the material, and therefore, rather than it be a constructive questioning and a continuation of the material, it will sort of diverge into other topics. Lecture 4, The Seven Senses. All life we know is gifted with some combination of the seven senses, though no known species has all seven. The strength of each sense one has varies species to species, and even amongst individuals of the same kin, regardless, they vary greatly. Likewise, how each sense is even used on a physical and behavioral level varies greatly too amongst all the forms of life. We must acknowledge our own strengths and weaknesses as individuals when it comes to these senses, and respect that while our senses give us all our insights into the world around us, other species' senses are often far better than our own, and thus we simply can't access their insights. Therefore, we ultimately by default cannot even sense, much less appreciate the full perspective, so to speak, of the world around us. We do not have the acute sense of touch that spiders do, who can react to the slightest motion several lengths of their entire body away on its web. We do not have a pig's acute sense of taste, for they have several thousand more taste buds than any of us. We do not have a dog's sense of smell, who can use their nose to detect things completely hidden from our own senses. We do not have a bat's sense of hearing, a sense so powerful it effectively nullifies the need for their eyes to navigate whatsoever in certain species. We do not have an eagle's acute sight, which can spot tiny prey hundreds upon hundreds of feet in the air. A shark's capability to use electromagnetism to detect life around them in the water is a sense we have no access to whatsoever. Likewise, with a snake's thermal vision, another sense that is completely inaccessible to us. Given the wide array of these senses, anything claimed to be undetectable or represented by tools, such as a machine that measures dark matter and displays its findings, in any capacity is not something that exists in our universe. However, things supposedly undetectable by certain individuals or some specific species is very possible, if not outright likely. Lecture 5, On Posture. To incentivize respectful behavior and help calm your mind, it is encouraged when meditating, praying, etc., to not do any other physically active tasks, and simply focus on whatever you wish to pray for or meditate on. Many religions and philosophies have varying expectations and strictness when it comes to the correct posture or motion. Personally, I believe first and foremost you should use any position most comfortable to you if you are in pain or have any physical attribute that limits your accessible options. If neither applies to you, and you are undecided as to what posture to take, here are my opinions on what you should and shouldn't consider. Prostrating is something I have never found appropriate for myself personally. While being humble is an admirable trait, to prostrate in my opinion is excessive. Even if you believe in a hierarchy, even one of a divine kind, to literally lay before them is simply diminishing the respect you as an autonomous being gifted with life deserves, when simply sitting or kneeling is more than adequate to show respect in that context. There is no one utmost recognized best posture to me, so to speak, but rather I see 5 to choose from or alternate between. Standing with your arms close to your body, sitting straight forward down on a seat, sitting crisscross on the floor, taking a knee, or kneeling on both knees. Again, if you have injury, pain, or any physical attribute that does not allow any of these options, then please use whatever position that works best for you. Choosing what I consider an ideal position isn't disrespectful significantly, but knowingly putting your body in pain or shaming yourself over not having any of these options accessible to you is, so do not do it. Lecture 6. Basic forms of state oppression. Every inch of the world we inhabit is sadly, unjustly, and cruelly ruled by one state or another. Before I go on, I just want to emphasize, I do not believe monopolies on violence are good or justified, and I do not believe in any state's right to exist or rule. Unfortunately, as we just stated, we live in a world dominated by these states, and we must do our best while stuck under their unjust rule. In these challenges, pacifism and mutual aid will be our best tools. We must resist imprisonment as a system, for all beings only have one life to live that can end at any moment. Redemption and education regularly gives healthier societal outcomes. In addition, leaving imprisonment as an option for the state always incentivizes it to pass laws against its current targets, criminalizing their very thoughts, identity, etc., that would allow them to imprison said targeted groups. We must resist false state propaganda, be it erasure of history, rewriting of history, or whatever. Only evidence-backed and widely scholarly accepted revelations should result in us actively rewriting our understanding of history and the world. Forced reclaiming of land by the state is awful, for it violates the consent of the local community and gives direct rule of the land to those who have no true ties to it in their hearts or minds. Do not put your faith in state-run judicial systems, for they regularly kill or imprison the innocent without evidence and even get away with doing so when they knew you were innocent, even by their own laws. They do this whilst allowing the state to not only violate any basic sense of moral standards, but oftentimes even the state's own laws themselves. Such blatant inconsistency is a violation of the rights of life, for it enforces injustice and unnatural inequality among society. Corporations and states are not living beings magically created through evolution like us. Therefore, our individual and collective rights should always supersede that of these draconian organizations. The basic rights of all life should not require wealth or labor exploitation to achieve. Thus, we should oppose state or corporate control over food, water, housing, education, healthcare, mobility, and freedom of expression. Lastly, militarization must be opposed for the evil it truly is. Arming a military requires massive taking of wealth from the populace and mass resource exploitation, which kills the natural world we are so deeply tied to. Having a large army is a blatant coup risk, which is always basically inherently unjust and undemocratic. It also pressures other states around them to do the same, which only results in even more life suffering from these moral injustices. Also, with only one life to live, such mass violence is nothing short of damning, evil, and reckless. In the majority of cases, populations are statistically far more likely to die or be imprisoned due to the oppressive enforcement units of their own state rather than opposing states. In addition, larger gatherings of militarized groups at one time puts massive strain on the surrounding resources, which leads to further environmental degradation. Lecture 7. Hoarding knowledge and artifacts. We are the most well-equipped record keepers of any life to exist. Our deep history of writing carries the very words of the ancestors beyond their lifetimes, thus in a way immortalizing them and keeping their spirits alive in the universe. Our rich history of building and crafting allows us to peer even further back in time than our writing, leaving an echo countless years down the line in the archaeological record of how our ancestors literally shaped and saw the world around them. If we ourselves are to have any meaning beyond our brief time in existence, we must not only do our best to pass down as much as possible to the next generations about ourselves, we must also instill a culture of preservation and respect for the ancestral past to ensure maximum longevity of our echoes. Hoarding significant pieces of the past from the public accessibility, as well as refusing to return pieces of our history to these groups whose history it is a part of, is to be condemned. For we cannot keep our ancestors' memories alive if what they left behind is quite literally hidden from us. Charging exorbitant amounts for access to the writing of the ancestors is just as condemnable, for not only does it restrict us from the words of our past, it both violates the biggest utility of writing over oral translation in the first place, which is to preserve and share information, as well as prioritizing the personal wealth of the sellers during their time as mortal beings over the much longer-term words of our collective history, which, unlike wealth, can be more or less immortal. Outright destroying this history is even worse than the former acts, for while restricting the history to a select few leaves said history far too vulnerable to being lost, destroying it simply loses it outright forever. Not only does this erase all that remains of us beyond our deaths, thus murdering the very spirit of our ancestors themselves, not only does it kill any hope of people in the modern world finding meaning in the past, it even kills any possible connection all future generations could have possibly had with their ancestors. Thus, destroyers of what we have preserved are doing an evil act even many murderers do not do. They are committing violence to the past, present, and future all simultaneously. To fight this evil, we must preserve our history, make it as accessible as possible, and, particularly in the case of writing, share it as far and wide as you possibly can. If historical objects are stolen, do not persist in berating the thieving party until it is returned. If history is being systematically destroyed, the world should unite against those who are said erasers of history. If texts are not widely accessible, those who have access to it should write on its contents themselves and share it as widely as possible. Lecture 8 on Patriarchy. Patriarchy is to be opposed at every turn. Your genitalia and gender identity do not have any measure on the value of your gift of life. Excluding or devaluing entire genders in your society only leads to ignorance, for every individual has a unique perspective to contribute to society. By intentionally blinding yourself to entire categories of life experiences, you only understand less of the world, and this resulting ignorance leads to all sorts of immorality and failure. It leads to irrational fears and hatred towards anyone not within the patriarchy, which then leads to mass violence and truly disgusting acts of hatred towards innocent life. This also leads to excluding entire sectors of the world from other genders, which violates the rights of life to freedom and exploration. Any words in any sacred text that condone patriarchy or the lessering of any not within it are inherently wrong, both factually and morally. Thus, any segments of those texts with this language can be ignored in your personal moral journey. Do not destroy these parts of the text when sharing or preserving them. Remember, preservation is a sacred act and duty. Simply do not preach or internalize these parts. Gender is a beautiful expression of our experience, one that is never to be silenced, regardless of its identity or form expressed. All of them hold an equal great personal value. Lecture 9 on Offerings. So long as one remains within the general following guidelines, the exact timings, materials, and quantities are up to a practitioner's discretion for what they wish to offer if they are interested in doing so. If one wishes to feel emotional or spiritual fulfillment by leaving offerings, do not be excessively wasteful. Perishable offerings should only be left outside for all fellow creatures to partake in, not left indoors or thrown away. Smoke offerings should never be conducted in areas prone to wildfires. Those in said areas must keep such activities indoors. No person or animal should be actively harmed for an offering under any circumstances. The only time meat is an accessible offering is when feeding carnivores in the environment the practitioner is in to aid those creatures in their survival. Keep in mind, this does not demand all practitioners give offerings whatsoever. These are merely the rules to follow for those who wish to do so. Lecture 10. The Two Veils. So how do we acknowledge both personal divine experiences and no divine intervention as we know it? Well, we are most likely not within the first universe to have ever existed. While I believe only one universe exists at a time, this is constantly switching between expansion and contraction, like the beating heart of literally everything in time and space. Past universes may have operated under slightly different laws than our own. We also can deduce that if there were past universes, our known universe must be made out of said past reality's material. Given that it is easy to imagine that from time to time, Those echoes written into our universe of its past manifest to create exceptional things beyond our general understanding. Think of it like a video game built off of an engine of a previous game. Even if the new game has all brand new characters, stories, even genre, some glitches that happen in the old game are still going to occur because deep down it shares a connection with the previous game. Likewise, occasionally past echoes of the previous universes may glitch in our own reality, for lack of a better term, resulting in what we identify as magic and miracles. For example, in our world, unless it is frozen, we can't walk on water. However, perhaps under the physics of a past universe, this very much was possible. In our reality, if it weren't for the crushing gravity, one could, in a spacesuit, walk on the liquid metallic surface of gas giants. So one could easily imagine, with just ever so slightly different laws of physics, this may have been possible in a past universe. Thus, we can simultaneously have some room to give some acknowledgement for one of Jesus' supposed miracles, walking on water, while still having no divine intervention. While it is possible Mary also had a moment of magic in becoming pregnant with Jesus, as all sorts of species in our own world can reproduce in this context, there are even recorded cases of this happening in nature with species that typically require a partner. I personally do not believe this. I simply think the virgin myth of Mary is false. However, I must concede that given how the system I am laying out before me works, it is absolutely plausible and justified to believe in the virgin birth of Jesus from Mary. For those who do believe this, I would actually highly recommend reading Agrippa's works in defense of women, for its arguments spiritually very much line up with this disposition and very much uses it to elevate the spiritual status of women. So we have established the first veil, the beginning of the universe, as well as how it affects most magical experiences. The one exception is prophecy, or future divination. How do we square this with our autonomy and free will? Well, this is where the second veil, the future end of our universe and the rebirth of the next, comes in. The path forward is constantly branching further as all life exacts change in the world. The closer in time and the more information we have in relation to said future events, the more confidently we can predict them. For example, if I have work 9 to 5 tomorrow, I can be reasonably confident I will not be home during that time tomorrow. I'll be at work. However, how confident can I be in assuming that exactly 2 weeks ahead from 9 to 5, I'll be at the same workplace again? A year? Several? Thus, pure deductive reasoning certainly plays a part oftentimes, particularly the less further in time their prediction is. However, I do not think that is everything. People seeing these prophetic visions are having a genuine personal religious experience, and sometimes they turn out to be shockingly accurate. The mechanism is unique to each practitioner and experience. However, all these mechanically will hold something in common if we remember our previous principle of branching timelines. Each experience is an individual being shown the image of one possible individual road we have constructed before us in the future at the moment. However, it is not immune to being changed by our collective will on this earth, thus leading us down a neighboring path, or creating an all-new one. This does three things. It respects the experiences of people engaged in future divination, it preserves our agency in the universe, and it helps explain why so many prophecies turn out to be wrong. Even if the individual isn't just making it up for ulterior motives, which is typically the case sadly, they are only being shown one of the many possible paths our past actions have built before us. Remember, the further in time you predict, the less statistically inevitable the path you are being shown is. The furthest possible future, which is after the end of our universe, thus acts as a second veil we cannot see beyond in our reality, much akin to the beginning of the universe. Lecture 11, on burial rites. Given the life on Earth feeds and sustains us, I consider it an act of giving back to the universe to practice excarnation. It is a powerful symbol of a lack of emphasis or even outright opposition to anthropocentrism. We are a part of the natural cycle of life, and one of countless species who all have inherent value by merely being given the gift of life. I consider it to be a hypocritical stance to allow humans to eat the corpses of naturally deceased animals, but not vice versa. In order to instill a love and respect for life, we always do our best to value all beings as equally as we possibly can. However, what procedure to follow this should be up to the individual's will. regardless of if that is burial of the bones or cremation. In cases of burial, the surrounding environment should be taken into account. For example, putting the bones in an above-ground coffin if you're in a very marshy area. In keeping with commitment to preservation, it is highly discouraged to destroy or disturb previous burials to make room for new ones or new construction in general. The only times these should be disturbed in any way are in cases of archaeological excavation. Lecture 12. Acceptance of personal choice in community. Conversion from this group to another, or vice versa, in addition to belonging to other groups simultaneously whilst a part of this one, is always allowed for any reason. It is one thing to make a case for joining or staying in a community, that is fine. However, to shame or punish someone for exercising their free will when it comes to their chosen communities is unacceptable. This group should never be closed off to new members who share our environmentalist and anti-authoritarian values. For if what we advocate for is necessary and good, then it is inherently selfish to hide or restrict our values from other communities. We should actively reach out to other religious communities and work together when our goals align, particularly when it comes to actions against ecocide and genocide. Lecture 13. Caste systems. Caste systems that serve for life and/or are inherited by birth are not to be condoned under any circumstances. People are ever-changing, and caste systems have very negative classist stereotypes and negative effects built into them, both of which restrict people's freedoms. Regardless of where you're born, when you're born, or what world you are born into, you should be treated equally with respect and opportunities. To punish someone for their birth is also flawed, for none of us have enacted our own birth. We had no way of influencing this ourselves, and thus can't be justly held responsible in any way. Additionally, history is filled with examples that disprove one's birth determines their destiny or traits in this life. Lecture 14. Love and wishes. True love is a mutual, positive, and consensual thing between different beings. Thus, regardless of your disposition on the reality or effects of erotic binding wishes and magic, they are not to be condoned. For wishing for a force to override another person's free will and become affectionate towards you is subsequently not true love. If one truly feels the need to combine romance and wishing or magic, consider focusing on empowering yourself instead. For example, I pray I may look and speak beautifully, and best my luck at finding love for which I so eagerly seek. This allows one to put their wishes into their romantic searching process whilst not incentivizing sentiments that devalue the free will of others potentially. Lecture 15. Dragons. Dragons are to be the collective mascot, so to speak, for Gisophian groups for a plethora of reasons, some of which are admittedly arbitrary and mundane, such as simply always viewing dragons as awesome, ancient, and magical. Most of these reasons, however, are based on the vast catalog of draconic mythology, which itself is universal amongst many cultures. Indeed, indigenous people of every continent have draconic myths. Thus, dragons are symbolic of the pantheistic and universalist traits of this philosophy. In Bhutan and Wales, the dragon is a symbol of not only the land, but even the very people themselves, too. In East Asian mythos, the dragon is generally associated with water in all its various forms: rivers, lakes, seas, waterfalls, etc. This is fitting for our reverence of all forms of creatures, for water is something universally needed by all beings to live. Lecture 16. Sacred library functions. As stated before, all temples should have a sacred library with as many important texts as possible. This library should be accessible to everyone, and all books are allowed to be read. Anyone above the practitioner rank is required to split librarian duties with fellow members given the same responsibility. If possible, everyone should be able to print books' contents to be taken home from the library itself at as cheap of a price as could be afforded to break even on the cost of such a service. All of the practitioner rank or higher are encouraged to aid in making copies of texts, writing new texts, replicating ones using original historical methods, etc. Librarians are responsible for keeping track of all texts and protecting them, organizing the texts, answering questions anyone visiting the library may have, and lastly, keeping the library itself safe to be in both physically and mentally as well as possible. In order for a text to elevate from simply a donation to the Temple Sacred Library to a coalition-wide recognition of sacred status, so to speak, it must pass 2 votes. There are no limits to how many times a text may be up for a vote. First vote is amongst all the practitioner rank or higher of the temple who said text was first physically given to. Here, a majority of 50% is required to receive approval. Second vote is between all the sage rank or higher of all other Gisophian temples. This also requires over 50% approval. If both votes are passed, it should be immediately added to the sacred list of texts, and other temple libraries should do their best to include it in their libraries as soon as is possible. The vote should be based on the individual's judgment of if said text aligns with our goals and principles. Books in the library should be physically accessible to the majority of people without a ladder. Thus, no book should be shelved more than 5 feet off the ground of whichever floor they are located on. Tables and chairs should be available for all visitors who enter the library as well. The final responsibility is translating text into other languages, which, much like copying, is to be done by volunteer work. However, this has no rank requirement whatsoever. Lecture 17. Introduction to Magic. Magic is events or actions with either spiritual, divine, or simply supernatural context/interpretation, regardless of its actors, origin, etc. Spellcraft is all active forms of magic that require one or more practitioners to participate in. Witchcraft is a specific type of spellcraft that uses natural materials. Said actions don't need exclusively natural material, just at least one aspect of it. Wizardry is a specific type of spellcraft that uses no natural materials, only manufactured material, and in some cases, no materials at all. Miracle is an event made possible by past universes reaching past the first veil into our reality. Divine Act is all forms of magic outside of spellcraft or miracles, and sacred is something of undescribable emotional and/or spiritual importance. Magic has no one single mechanism. In fact, this book's definition of magic includes any phenomena given divine/spiritual context or interpretation. Thus, things perfectly within our understanding can even be considered magical, depending on the viewer's perspective. Generic questions like, how does magic work in this system, are not able to be answered in a single sentence. Anything can be magical, so asking this question is the equivalent of asking, how does everything in existence work? It just can't be answered simply. Spellcraft works through gnosis. By replicating spiritual acts of the ancestors, their memory empowers our minds. By focusing your wishes/will through ritual, it empowers our minds. Lastly, by sensing the materials and setting of said spellcrafting, we further empower our mind by connecting us with a select section of the universe that we reside in. Lecture 18. On Animal Sacrifice. Ritual killing of any life under any circumstances on purpose is evil and is to be condemned. Not only does this rob said fellow being of the gift of life and violate their consent, it is also based on a lie. All supposed magic resulting from these sacrifices are false. They do not bless, but rather condemn. It normalizes murder of life, which has disastrous consequences on society when life is devalued. It depopulates the wilderness, disrupting nature unjustly. Lastly, it deprives the universe of a being who was loved and played a vital role in the wheel of life remaining active. Animal sacrifice is just as evil and condemnable as human sacrifice. Both are equally disgusting acts that are to be forever opposed and condemned. Lecture 19. Beyond the First Veil. Through lots of studying history and written texts, I have come across certain patterns using the concept of past worlds reaching through the first veil. After writing down every miracle I came across that both fits within the past reality system and I feel can't be simply explained by science or as a metaphor, a group of internally consistent past worlds began to emerge. All miracles I have come across that I can accept in this system are all represented in the difference between the 11 past universes and our own. Of course, no one person can possibly search through every recorded miracle in history, thus we will only cover one per past universe. For the amount of past worlds is something that can be understood by the efforts of but one individual. The first is called Tegisi Papa. In this universe, the laws were altered from our own so that many phenomena in physics that are invisible to us in reality were once visible. Gravity, quantum entanglements, etc. This world reached down to Hypatia to gift her with insights so powerful they inspired students of all faiths in a time in which intercommunal violence was rampant in Alexandria. In fact, I personally suspect the potency of this knowledge is the very reason why she was ultimately killed by a Christian mob, and nearly all knowledge of her teachings is lost nowadays. For those mobs, unlike the countless Christian students she had, likely couldn't reconcile her knowledge with their superstitions at the time, in particular when it comes to powerful pagan women. The second existence is Gisophaen, an existence in which somehow plant life of that time had the capacity to speak to all forms of life. This is where the seed of the sacred Kashmir cypress tree came that Zoroaster would plant in his travels. I suspect its sacred status is part of the reason the Abbasids destroyed it. Third is Tegisira, a world which has several chemical reactions that act differently than our own reality. This universe reached down to Ino, saving her from being poisoned, and thus allowed her to physically haunt the Emperor who had attempted to kill her until he made amends. Given his shame in being tricked, he had to be on record that it was her ghost that haunted him for killing her with the poison, and not that he had been tricked. The fourth existence is Tegisidu, a world which the fire reaches further and lasts longer than in our universe. This world reached down to Earth during the famous menorah miracle, where only 1 day's worth of candle oil miraculously lasted 8 days. Fifth amongst the past existence is Tegisito, a universe where lightning can originate and shoot out from many more surfaces than in our reality. This realm gifted a unique bird in North America, and said bird became the thunderbird in countless indigenous American traditions. Tegisini is the sixth existence, one in which its laws of physics could allow astral projection. When Matsu famously guided her loved ones through a storm at sea, it was this universe which connected with her will and allowed her to use this astral projection to guide the sailors safely back to shore. Seventh is Tegisila, where the physics of liquids is altered from our own in various ways. And it was Tegisila that reached down and gifted Jesus with the ability to walk on water. The eighth universe is known as Tegisisu, which alters gases and their physics rather than liquids like the previous existence. This is the universe which gifted Mani the ability to levitate by moving the very air around him in a way only physically possible in this past universe. Ninth is Tegisivo, a reality where light and shadow operate under very different physics than in our own reality. This universe reached down to the Buddha during his famous nap under the tree and made the shade stand still over him even when the sun moved. Tegisimi is the 10th existence, where all forms of life in it were self-reproductive and mutual procreation never evolved amongst its life forms. This universe gifted the mother of Apollonius of Tyana with, well, Apollonius himself, which according to the myth, she gave virgin birth to. The 11th and most recent past universe to our own is known as Tegisipa, where all forms of life had made many more forms of interspecies communication than our own reality that we have access to. This universe gifted Alexander the Great during his famous taming of Bucephalus, and it was communication between the two that calmed the horse. It was not afraid of its own shadow. That is just what the onlookers understood, for they cannot tap into this mutual communication between Alexander and Bucephalus. Lastly, the universe we inhabit is Tegisithi. Now what unique gift has our universe been given? Lecture 20, The Three Apocalypses. According to our current science, as I best understand it, we have 3 inevitable apocalypses we must overcome through study and innovation in the far, far future. First is an apocalypse of death, for eventually the very heat that powers the earth from its core will wane, and all life on it will need to find another home to live on. Second is an apocalypse of light, for eventually the sun will expand, swallowing planets and burning the earth's surface to permanent ruin. Life by then will need to find a new star to sustain itself. Lastly is an apocalypse of darkness, for the very universe itself is separating the material bodies. In time, all other planets in the solar system will be so distant they will no longer be visible to our eyes, much less other solar systems, galaxies, etc. that we see in the night sky today. This apocalypse is so distant and great that I do not even have any recommendations for what our goal should be to overcome it. That is only for our distant descendants to possibly understand and directly prepare for. All other divinely accomplished apocalyptic prophecies beyond this are false. So long as we do not destroy ourselves, these 3 apocalypses are the only inevitable threats to all life. Lecture 21, on genocide. Genocide is the ultimate manifestation of evil acts in this universe. It completely erases any respect or love for life whatsoever. It turns an entire land to ash and ruin, thus murdering the native fauna too. It violates the consent of countless beings and evilly robs them of the gift of life. Such mass death so quickly dooms the soul of the majority of those lost to be inevitably forgotten. It also destroys an integral part of the human history, for losing an entire community leaves an indefinite hole in our understanding of our own individual cultures and history. Those who condone or participate in genocide should be shunned by our community with no interaction whatsoever. Groups who aid in genocide should be boycotted forever, even after the genocide ends for their complicity. Additionally, while states shouldn't exist in general, states that have participated in genocide at any point in history have surrendered their right to any loyalty or respect even more so than other states. Every state in the Americas is founded on the genocide of indigenous Americans. Sudan has committed genocide at Darfur. Rwanda is infamous for its genocide. Iraq and Syria have committed genocide against its Kurdish communities in their borders. The Yazidis have been victims of genocide by multiple powers in the region. All three Caucasus states have committed genocide against one another. Turkey committed simultaneous genocides against its Greek, Armenian, and Assyrian communities. Israel is founded on the genocide of Palestinians and has continued to enact several genocides against them since. Iran has basically forced Zoroastrianism to near extinction within its borders. The so-called population exchange between India and Pakistan, in which thousands upon thousands died brutally, was also effectively a genocide. Bhutan tried to erase its entire Nepali population. Sri Lanka committed genocide against the Tamil communities on the island. Myanmar committed the Rohingya genocide. Cambodia is well known for Pol Pot's genocide. America tried to kill every dissenter in Vietnam. Indonesia is trying to destroy Papuan indigenous culture by force and suppression. Japan effectively committed genocide against the Ainu people and colonized their land. Both Koreas tried to kill all so-quote dissenters when they each controlled each other's territories. While it has been over 700 years, so this one is pushing it, if the state of Mongolia, not the Mongolian people or nation necessarily, is going to embrace the history of the Mongol Empire, then they must at least make some slight amends to grapple with destroying Baghdad and arguably one of the greatest collections of knowledge in human history. Every European state that has participated in colonization has committed genocide against one or several indigenous communities. This includes Portugal, Spain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Italy, the UK, Russia, and beyond this, Austria, Hungary, Norway, and Bulgaria, they all aided the Nazis in the Holocaust. Croatia effectively also participated in genocide during the fascist rule in World War II. Serbia is guilty of the Bosnia genocide. Greece committed genocide against its Muslim converts. Do not mistake the historical mislabeling of all Muslims in Greece as Turks. Many of those killed or displaced in that genocide were fellow Greeks. I could go on, but you get the point. Oppose genocide. For those who perpetrate it span the globe, and they are more than capable of committing such evil acts again. Lecture 22. On Community. Building communities of people that share our values is very important. We need neighborhoods made up of a community dedicated to love and mutual aid. A community where if someone attacks you, the entire community will show up to defend you. Where the community protects the land around them and all of its creatures. Where people of all walks of life feel embraced and welcomed. Where people protect each other during natural disasters and lend a hand in the rebuilding process afterwards. Where if someone in the community has the expertise, they can fix whatever needs repair in your home and are more than happy to do so. Where your neighbors engage with you and help you preserve as well as understand each other's history and culture. Where no HRA or government organization is required for the community to prosper. This means moving into homes in the same areas as your fellow guardians and lovers of life when feasible, and getting the word out there so newcomers know where to go if they seek community with us. Giving money to each other in times of need is also another critical aspect of mutual aid. We should wisely try to bring others in our community who already share at least some of our values. Knocking on every single door is far too inefficient, so one should focus on those who are already known to be broadly like-minded. Teachers are an integral part to this community building effort, for they can provide local community-based and thoroughly academic education to the youth. rather than state-backed institutions which are filled with anti-scientific and nationalist misconceptions and propaganda. Medically trained community members are also vital, particularly in states that do not have universal health care. For in those states, especially medical debt is a vital tool of cruel businesses to suppress and murder their own people, and having health care given by the community can literally save lives. These goals should also include several other services being provided by all members of the community to those who seek it. This includes food, water, shelter, education, healthcare, and local transportation. Lecture 23, A Poem on Life, Love, and Nature. Ara asili impilo agama, nuanara ai lirato maya. Priroda ubomi bolingo rata, Chesna ribani yon nolosha. Vida asich lo buneba, natura zindagi velo zola. Boasevgi jasho ser natura, bulalesti ano awa. Mila fikiri teko umama. Vita zendegi taio duma. Triradata ai naturo prama. Elska zendagi lufono ora. Gra amuri arokaria. Birtseva umoyo toetra. Alofa dashuri isando haya. Zoi agapi fisi. Life, love, nature. Lecture 24, On Sexuality. Sex between consenting adults is never ground for expulsion or shunning or shaming at all. While personally I condemn cheating, that is something between the participating individuals and is also not grounds for expulsion. Sexuality, despite what many religions teach, is not sinful or shameful. It is a beautiful part of being and is the bodily right of consenting adults. Other groups are forced into a position of pointless inconsistency by revering life and simultaneously finding the acts that create it shameful in some manner. This philosophy has no such issue, for it openly reveres both life and sexuality. People who are gay, bi, lesbian, etc. are a beautiful part of humanity just like everyone else and are welcomed in this community. Asexual people are likewise equally to be loved and respected as well. Lastly, polyamory is also permitted, and polyamorous individuals are likewise to be treated with equal love and welcomeness. Lecture 25, A Poem on Creatures. I am one with you, yet I am not you. I am neither manufactured nor artificial. I am above this earth and below it. I am not one, yet I am all. I am neither immortal nor understood. I am both around you and beyond you. I am created, but not by you. I am neither boundless nor bound by you. I am both ancient and contemporary. Lecture 26, Divinity within the life of our world. Many cultures believe some mix of the following traits apply to the divine. First, they have some capabilities we as humans can never achieve. Second, they are alive with us, but are not the same as us. Third, they have their own will, however, can be incentivized to interact with us or not depending on our actions. Lastly, they have insights into the world we do not have. We do not all recognize the same divine or lack thereof, but we do all acknowledge that animals exist. All of these traits, as discussed before, can be applied to all life around us. We have often looked to the skies for the divine, yet it has blinded us to the very divine around us. Indeed, every animal on earth is sacred, and metaphorically are all manifestations of magic or the divine. When you feel something in your soul when you look into the eyes of other life in the world, you are connecting with something sacred. For animals can fly, burrow, climb, see, and traverse in ways we are not capable of, and they manifest those abilities in our world. They are alive with us, but are not literally us. They are beings beyond ourselves, judging our actions on if they wish to interact with us or not. Lastly, as established earlier in this book, animals have insight we do not have and regularly manifest it on Earth. Lecture 27, The Power of Writing. Writing is arguably the most important innovation in human history. With it, we can communicate across space and time. For people miles away can receive one's words, and people of the distant past can have their message revived in the modern day. So long as one has the time and the resources, everyone should learn other languages. Not only does it expand your perspective and communication in general, but it provides us another way to preserve the memories of our ancestors. My suggestion and personal goal is to reach trilingual status in your first language, English in my case, your oldest ancestral language known and taught, that would be Mycenaean Greek for me, and lastly, at least one rare/endangered language of your choice. For me, I chose Ainu. This is not a requirement by any means, merely a suggestion based on personal belief and experience. One final addition to the topic of writing: for its entire known existence, it has had sacred qualities either literally or metaphorically for countless cultures spanning the globe. Thus, it doesn't just connect us with the words of our ancestors, but their very spiritual faith and practice as well. As of writing this, I'm working on a conlang for this community. It is inspired by a combination of modern Greek, Armenian, and Tibetan. It has VOS word order, no grammatical gender, no verb conjugation, and a little over 600 words in total, each written with a unique hieroglyph that is written in the Boustrophedon format. This is primarily to serve the purpose of a common, simple liturgy language amongst any particular group of practitioners who don't have a universally understood lingua franca, hence why its vocabulary pool at the moment is so small to full natural languages. Lecture 28. No such thing as perfection. There is nothing that ever has or will exist that is universally perfect. Thus, there is an infinite room for improvement in all things. The concept of a perfect divine is categorically impossible. Nowhere in the universe do we observe universal perfection, much less within ourselves. To feel ashamed of this is a misinterpretation, for we should feel overjoyed to always have room for improvement regardless of how far we have come. For something to be perfect would mean it would have no incentive to improve and learn, on top of the fact it must not be of this universe or present in it, for again, nothing universally perfect is observed in our reality. Thus, a perfect divine cannot be of any universe, including our own. Since there is infinite room for improvement in the world, we should just always aim to learn as much as possible and always fight for more rights than before. Lecture 29. Mount Athos, a monument to all our sins. One should always be critical of any authority, regardless of if it is a government or a religious institution, for both are vulnerable, if not outright likely, to become morally wrong, inconsistent, hypocritical, and oppressive, all in the name of power over the rights of others and justice in general. Mount Athos is perfectly symbolic of this for a plethora of reasons. For when the long separated yet theologically almost indistinguishable Oriental Orthodox Church and Eastern Orthodox churches had talks about finally reunifying, it was the monks of Mount Athos who spoke in favor of maintaining the separation. These few differences are based on a lack of acceptance of several councils, which in effect emanated from political greed. Nowhere in the Bible are these particular councils of bishops given permission to determine what Christianity is or isn't. So by using this justification, Mount Athos is tacitly saying that power politics and devotion to laws of elites are more important to them than actual faith or worship. Not to mention how hypocritical it is to demand that the Oriental Orthodox convert to your position when they accept only older and less ecumenical councils. Thus, by many understandings of the definition of what Orthodox even means, it is in fact the Oriental Orthodox churches who hold the more orthodox position. This is just the start of their inconsistency and hypocrisy. After all, they claim to hold Jesus and his teachings sacred, yet they have banned all women from their holding for over 1,000 years now and participate in a false orthodoxy that does not allow the ordination of women, something Jesus preached against and the Pauline patriarchal Christians tried to silence. The Gospel of Mary is the most accurate book of Jesus' true teachings. It is ancient and far more logically connected to what even the Pauline Christians say Jesus taught than Paul's pro-establishment and patriarchal teachings. Paul even denigrates Mary Magdalene in this gospel, despite the fact she is regularly shown to understand Jesus' teachings the best with the fastest and the most accurate answers. When claims by Paul and the other apostles start that Mary's womanhood disqualifies her to teach in any way, Jesus says very clearly, quote, "Any of those filled with the Spirit of light will come forward and interpret what I say. No one will be able to oppose them," end quote. Indeed, it is women who are the most important both at the start of Jesus' life and after his death when spreading his theology and philosophy. Mother Mary gave birth to him, something highly venerated by all Christians, including supposedly those on Mount Athos, and Mary Magdalene shared what is in all probability the teachings truest to what Jesus actually said on earth. Thus, in a Gisophian sense, she is keeping his metaphorical spirit alive, for again, in this philosophy there is no afterlife, and thus we have a duty to remember the past as best as possible to preserve their ghosts/echoes. Beyond enlightening the Mount Athos monks of their own supposed faith, it's worth highlighting no other territory on earth universally bans women. Thus, to this day, beyond societal factors, women from all over the world are born to be able to see less of the world. This is an issue all parents with daughters should take personal offense to, for they are telling your child that they are unworthy of entire segments of the earth merely due to immutable characteristics. They are also responsible for ensuring several inequalities into law amongst all of Greece, for the government of Greece lets only Mount Athos self-govern unlike any other territory in Greece. They also don't pay taxes, despite the fact they regularly are given taxpayers' money of all genders by the Greek government. This forces women to pay for an institution that not only oppresses them, but outright excludes them. In addition, it forces Greece to waste political capital defending this state of things, for it blatantly violates EU and humanitarian law, both of which the Greek government are far more than happy to take money from. If one gets to be exempt from taxation while the rest of society isn't, then at the very least, you should be banned from profit. Yet even this is a moral standard the monks of Mount Athos are unable to adhere to, for you can find countless good souls by these monks, in addition to outright real estate holdings which provide an excessive amount of wealth. Eastern Christian orthodoxy preaches you cannot inherit sin from your precursors, a point they take pride in to use to differentiate themselves from Catholics. Yet Mount Athos banned all Catalans for hundreds of years due to a small raiding Catalan group many years ago. How was banning all Catalans for hundreds of years anything other than trying to hold them accountable for ancestral sin, a concept that is explicitly taught against in the supposed faith of these Mount Athos monks? Their misdeeds go further, for they gave the title, quote-unquote, High Protector of the Holy Mountain to literally Adolf Hitler himself. Several monasteries put photos of Hitler on the walls next to holy images too. This blatant embrace of genocidal fascism is yet another clearly immoral act, if not the most immoral. Lecture 30, on membership dues. Any religious institution that requires dues for membership is a scam. To be a member of a theological community should only demand one's time and respect. Putting a price on it makes it inaccessible towards more people, which is antithetical towards building a community. Additionally, people come to religious communities for a sense of purpose and/or meaningful connections, both of which can only be achieved with our minds, not our wallets. By demanding money for membership, these groups are for-profit businesses first and foremost, even if every single cent goes into quote-unquote continued and future operation, end quote. Accepting donations, selling crafts, and putting prices on non-theological events at a temple are all more than acceptable and outright encouraged so long as we exist in this capitalist society. However, the requirement of money for membership or theological participation is wrong. The transaction of money has no place in these activities. Lecture 31. The Olympians and Titans in Contemporary Life and Dinosaurs. While the ancients could not have known this when the original Hellenic creation mythos was composed originally, as it turns out, we in the modern day can find a lot of metaphors for the evolution of life in these stories. For as discussed previously, contemporary life on Earth is very representative of historical understandings of the gods, so thus can be aptly described as divine in some way. And if the gods in these Hellenic myths are contemporary to the composers, then it is logical to view the Hellenic gods as representative of all life in its forms alongside us in the world. Both animals and the Hellenic gods come in countless forms, and both have control of aspects of the world around us we human beings are incapable of. Both go through stages of evolution as well, for deities are forgotten and go extinct just like the Tasmanian tiger. Others are combined with closely related forms to make brand new deities just like mules, while other deities branch off from a precursor and become unique. The symbolism goes deeper than just contemporary life as well, for the Titans connect metaphorically very well with ancient eras of life such as the time of the dinosaurs. Both are very famous for their largest forms, which were far larger than most life around us today on average. Both came after the creation of the world, yet long before us. Lastly, Kronos was tricked by swallowing a giant stone instead of Zeus, which led to the Titans' fall. Likewise, a giant stone, so to speak, was responsible for the ultimate ending of the reign of the dinosaurs. And in both cases, it was not the rock itself which directly caused the collapse, but rather the aftermath/consequences of said rock in motion. Lecture 32. War and Defense. All offensive warfare is to be condemned. Outside of defense, to take up arms is always unjust. If there are conflicts overseas, you should not ignore them. Have solidarity with the defending party by providing aid and vocal support. Outside of defense, pacifism should be universally practiced. For while strength can be achieved through body and mind, love can be achieved through mind alone only. Thus, to enact your will by force rather than persuasion demonstrates a failure to love your fellow being who is only gifted with this one life alone. However, in dire times of defense, one should aid in protecting their fellow beings in any way they are able to, regardless if that's with research, medical aid, etc. If your own state you reside in is the offending party in a war, you should not prioritize nationalism over solidarity with the innocent victims of war. Side with the innocent defenders in any way you safely can. Lecture 33. A Middle Way on Societal Love. While both Mozi and Confucius stated powerful truths on how society should love one another, followers of both teachers viewed their positions as in opposition to one another. However, I believe they were wrong to do this, for both teachings can lead toward a powerful united path when combined and specified. Confucius is correct in that one should in general respect and listen to your parents. However, much like the mandate of heaven, the mandate to respect and obey your parents is nullified if they abuse you. Likewise, Mozi is correct that love should not just originate in the family, but be given universally. However, this mandate is also nullified to individuals who abuse you unjustly. Love yourself, love your neighbor, love the stranger, but do not feel obligated to extend this love towards your abusers/bullies. The core of this misunderstanding between the two groups is that equal love doesn't have a universal path. While yes, the dynamics of how love is expressed between parents and children should be different than relations with others, the quantity of love you give to others can still be equal to what you give your parents. You could love your parents in a different way than loving your partner, while having equal love for both in your heart. Love can be universal in quantity without being universal in form. Lecture 34. Redemption and Forgiveness. Many are under the impression good deeds and bad deeds can be approached almost mathematically. For example, many say the American founding fathers who owned slaves were ultimately good people because they fought against the monarchy and enshrined many freedoms in our Constitution in the United States. This is a miscalculation, for one's good deeds does not erase their past bad deeds, or vice versa. The power of forgiveness of any of your misdeeds is not within your authority. Only the mistreated has the power to bestow forgiveness. Lecture 35. On Universal God. The universe itself is the universal deity so many have sought throughout faiths and history. The universe itself is the creator of all life. The universe expands well beyond us in the sky, much like depictions of the heavens. The universe itself created all matter and everything we know. If you wish to see the form of a universal divine, simply look to the stars in the night sky and the living creatures on earth. If you wish to understand the mind and laws of a universal God, look to physics and the mechanics of the universe itself. While I personally consider myself a polytheist, for I consider all life on earth divine, so to speak, and I have a vast personal pantheon of people as well as deities throughout history I celebrate with holidays, art, etc., this concept of the universe itself being one universal deity is also one I recognize and is compatible with my polytheism. For worshipping many gods does not negate the divinity of their own origin/creator, and the universe itself, again, created all life which I revere. Ultimately, the animals of the earth are closer to us in all ways, and more receptive to our presence than the entirety of the universe. Thus, I consider a polytheistic approach to religious activities more personal than a monotheistic approach. Ultimately, the universe can create all things yet cannot act with intent, whereas animals can act with intent yet cannot create all things. Only when combined can these two aspects of reverence result in a divine cosmology that can both create and act with intent. Lecture 36. The Defeat of Deimos. In the 400s AD, Deimos of Ephesus destroyed a statue of Artemis. both something sacred to many people and an important part of our history collectively as living beings. Again, there is no afterlife, so the construction of the statue has erased any potential that the individual statue had for meaning amongst the billions of souls on Earth who have come after him. He enacted the will of authoritarian elites whose power was intertwined with the early church itself. For they passed many laws condoning violence against all non-Christians, as well as everything they held sacred. In his arrogance and misconception of triumph, he erected a stone slab with the inscription boasting, quote, "Having destroyed a deceitful image of the Martyr Artemis, Demeas set up the sign of truth honoring God, the driver away of idols and the cross, that victory bringing the immortal symbol of Christ," end quote. However, he failed to understand the power of ideas in history, for unlike individual people, they can survive thousands of years and be revived after being buried and forgotten for thousands of years, something impossible for the life of any individual person. Demeas is long dead, and his ability to enact his will is long lost, but many pieces of Artemis worship/reverence have been recovered and created since his day. Ultimately, while he robbed all the people after him of that individual statue, and he robbed his fellow people of 400s AD Ephesus of Artemis worship, he can't rob us in the modern day from revering Artemis. Thus, in his mission to erase Artemis, it has thankfully failed. Demeas is dead. Artemis worship lives. Lecture 37. The Insights of Bucephalus. Just as some humans are in general more anxious than others, all species of animals have certain individuals amongst them who are more anxious than others, such as Bucephalus, who for the first 10 years of his life had not been paired with a rider, for none could calm him. His owner, Philonicus, had tried for years to sell him, as was his profession as a horse dealer, and now he had come far north all the way to Pella, the capital city of King Philip of Macedon. As in those days Pella was accessible by sea, he'd sailed his way all the way up here. Unsurprisingly, Bucephalus had become even more anxious than before, even after returning to land due to the sea travel. Despite meeting on the plains, Bucephalus seemed, quote, altogether interactive, neither allowing anyone to mount him nor heeding the voice of Philip's attendants, end quote, from Plutarch, The Parallel Lives. Yet when Philip's son Alexander saw him, he understood this being simply needed better love, respect, and understanding. When Philip tried sending them away, Alexander was insistent on buying Bucephalus. Of course, not being fluent in Macedonian Greek, Bucephalus could not receive an understanding of Alexander's words. However, much like all animals, horses have a capacity to sense our emotions, and this passion as well as respect for Bucephalus from Alexander was something Bucephalus felt when Alexander was alongside him. Upon the stroking of Alexander's hand upon him, Bucephalus felt at ease and at a true loss out of all of anxiety for the first time. He attempted his best to convey to Alexander all his thoughts in great detail, how his kin did not wish to be mistreated, and having only seen humans kill non-humans, begged in his mind for Alexander to teach all humans to treat all natural life with the same respect. It was at this moment, either by chance or by will, they were blessed by Tigisipa, the 11th cycle of our universe, and they were able to sense for but a moment each other's deep thoughts in a miracle. However, much like any being, Alexander could not know everything or understand all, and thus when sensed from his perspective, this brief message from Bucephalus was not truly heard clearly or understood. He interpreted this message to treat human and non-human life more equally as the gods, he believed in at least at the time, telling him he was free to slaughter people in his wars like he already did cattle for religious ceremony. Not that it was Bucephalus himself with the exact opposite intent, to elevate his respect for non-human life rather than decrease his respect for human life. Alexander marches on Greece. After countless months of training, Bucephalus held a tight bond with Alexander. He had even come to enjoy their training, but this day Bucephalus received an extra gift. For having been under the control of the horse merchant his entire life previously, he had only ridden freely with his new best friend in and around the city of Pella. It was now the city gates opened before him, while thousands of humans and fellow horses stood behind him, and Alexander beckoned him to lead them beyond the city and out into the world. With the joy of adventure and freedom in his heart, Bucephalus led them southwest as requested. The further they marched brought increasing joy for him, for he was gifted with his first insights of many beautiful birds, mammals, and reptiles that he had never witnessed before. Thus Bucephalus took this as a lesson that the further they go, the more joy he will experience. Eventually he came upon the Vale of Tempe, where another big group of humans and fellow horses stood. He did not understand why Alexander told him to stop as he spoke to the other group, but he could sense the opposing group's hostility towards theirs. They eventually turned around, but rather than continue on paths, Alexander motioned for him to turn into the woods and climb the slopes. Bucephalus did so with ease thanks to extensive training. Eventually, though, it became so steep they needed to carve stones into the rock. Yet with patience he continued on, being thrilled to see a mountaintop up close for the first time. After going down the hill on the other side, they appeared behind the opposing group. Bucephalus could not understand why he only sensed timidness now from them as they let them pass now, but he took this as another lesson in the power of moving forwards. Quote, "Marching the roads was powerful for bringing new sights, but marching in the woods did that and can ease the human's anger. Wow," end quote, he thought to himself. Continuing the march south brought Bucephalus several more gifts. At Thermopylae, he saw officials cheering for Alexander. He could not understand their words, but they were proclaiming Alexander hegemon of a largely symbolic league. He witnessed similar things upon arriving in Thebes and Attica. After returning to Pella, the lessons of the gifts of travel and the power of simply walking the earth were permanently ingrained in the heart of Bucephalus. Spring of 355 BCE. Bucephalus could barely contain his excitement. He saw large groups assembling before the gate and knew another adventure awaited him. Even more excitingly, when the gates opened, Alexander motioned for him to go northwards this time, again to lands brand new to Bucephalus. After several miles, Bucephalus witnesses the differences of this path. He could no longer sense the coast this way, and it was certainly more cold as well as the rugged lands he'd previously gone to in comparison. Arriving at the slopes of the mountain of Haemus, they saw another valley blocked by an opposing group whose hostile emotions Bucephalus could sense, even at this distance. This valley also required an uphill walk to the other end of it. The opponents utilized this by sending carts down the hill at the Macedonians. Following Alexander's guidance, Bucephalus led the horses in opening up gaps for the carts to pass harmlessly by. They then began firing arrows at them, confusing Bucephalus as to why this group was trying to hurt them. Bucephalus marched forward, remembering how moving forward helped matters last time on tension. Unbeknownst to him, the heavy Macedonian troops had done major damage to their opponents already, and thus, with the charge led by Bucephalus, they fled the field. Bucephalus understood this as his marching forward, bringing peace yet again. Thrace. Arriving near Paeus Island, Bucephalus saw a human construction unique to what he'd seen before. A fortification structure on an island in the river. Additionally, there was a third army on the opposite side of the river. Unsure of what to do, he stopped and awaited Alexander's command. The rest of Alexander's army then proceeded to work until deep into the night, making floating platforms, boats, etc. Thankfully, Alexander could tell Bucephalus was anxious to cross the water while looking at it, and thus they crossed at night to keep him calm across the river. Not expecting a river crossing at night, the third army was caught completely off guard and fled their camp without any fighting whatsoever. Now turning back to the island, they quickly raised a white flag, and Bucephalus could sense the decrease of all harmed humans on both sides' tension. Yet again, he thought, trotting forward brings forth good things. Illyria. Rather than return home, the journey continued westward to Pelium. There, a fortified citadel on a plain next to a river stood before Bucephalus and co. They made camp outside a firing range from the walls and began constructing things of wood Bucephalus did not recognize. After a day of this, something unusual happened. On the hills around the plain, another army appeared. Yet again, they were in a one army against two situation. It was then Bucephalus, led by the instruction of Alexander, called for the full rehearsal routine. Bucephalus was overjoyed, for they had practiced this many times. In perfect unison, they all marched in step, stopped, turned, swung their weapons, and then repeated. Bucephalus became even more joyous when their routine sent the army on the hills running. He even did a little trotting dance leading the group back to camp afterwards. After this victory, they crossed the nearby river and hid in the woods for 3 days. On the third night, they crossed back. This time, the citizens of Pelium were no longer behind the walls. However, with sadness and grief, Bucephalus watched as the Macedonians slaughtered many people like they did cattle at festivals. Alexander did not command him to move forward at this time. The tragedy at Thebes. The next adventure brought Bucephalus down south again towards Thebes. Unlike last time they were here, Bucephalus could sense the Macedonians and the people of Thebes had far more hostile intent. After some time, the Thebans rushed out of the gates and brutal conflict erupted. Bucephalus was glad the other Macedonians were protecting him and his best friend, but confused as to why the opposing army attacked them. Ultimately, they were repelled back behind the city gates. That night, Alexander called Bucephalus to action, and ultimately they started attacking the city's fortifications. This further confused Bucephalus as to why they needed to breach these walls, as they'd already seen what was in there last time they were here. The Macedonian army eventually broke through. To the horror of Bucephalus, the Macedonians were even more violent in their barbaric acts than in Pelium. This horror left him paralyzed and unable to run away. He took this as a lesson to never retread roads already traveled, for they lead to tragedy. Ultimately, the destruction was so thorough the city never returned and itself became extinct as a living, inhabited city. Bucephalus steps into Asia. The longest and final adventure came not long after their return home to Pella. This time, countless more men and horses joined them than previously. This, combined with heading down new roads, filled Bucephalus with excitement once again. After many miles, they came upon a series of boats to cross the Hellespont. Despite his fears, with some encouragement from his best friend, he was braved and helped lead the cross. Thankfully, back on land once across, they marched deeper in Anatolia. His bravery was rewarded as only a few miles further they came upon the legendary city of Troy. Here Bucephalus witnessed many beautiful things and countless smiling faces, which filled his heart with joy. They turned east and made their way towards an ancient city. Along the way, Bucephalus watched as at his best friend's command they helped many they passed by along the roads. Arriving at the plains of Granicus, Bucephalus saw a Persian army for the first time. Alexander quickly called for battle formation. Between the two armies was merely the Granicus River itself. Many Macedonians then tried to cross, but found themselves halted in combat as the Persian forces pushed them back. Knowing the power of marching forward in his heart, Bucephalus, without the instruction of Alexander, led the surrounding elite cavalry across the river to the side of the melee. Then Alexander commanded him to turn, and he led the accompanying warriors crashing into the Persian forces. Eventually, after much bloodshed, the opposing army broke rank and fled. Alexander was grateful, for if it were not for the actions of Bucephalus, they surely would have been defeated. Next they marched south, passing through Zelea and Magnesia, through their way to Sardis. Along the way they were approached by the leader of Sardis. Bucephalus did not understand the words he shared with Alexander, but in fact he was surrendering the city. They walked forward and were celebrated when welcomed into the city. Bucephalus was pleased that their adventuring had seemed to bring celebration to so many people. Further along the Aegean coast. Continuing south along the Aegean coast of Anatolia saw the same occurrence in city after city. After several days of rest at Ephesus, the holy city of Artemis, they then continued south further on to Miletus. Despite being welcomed by the suburbs, the core of the city had shut its gates to them. They rested there for several days while the Macedonians began the same strange constructions of wood he'd seen before. This time, they were completed and he saw their purpose as they hurled massive boulders at the wall with thundering crashes. The walls eventually broke, and after fighting in the now opened gap, the Macedonians rushed into the city with Alexander and Bucephalus right behind. The city stopped fighting back, and unlike in Thebes, the Macedonians seized as well. Bucephalus felt very proud of Alexander for his growth, and now better heeding his wisdom by demonstrating better love for life. They continued on to Halicarnassus the next day, which was the final major city on the west coast of Anatolia, stopping by several major friendly settlements along the way, of course. Just like before, they made camp outside of the walls and began assembling siege equipment. This time, Bucephalus led the scouting party themselves, unlike before. Also unlike before, the scouting party was actively resisted by the defenders, who rushed out to attack them. Knowing standing still brings bad things, especially in this situation, he led their forces to the side of the path and then turned and pushed the attackers back into the city. Returning to base camp, Alexander took a portion of the army and made their way to the other gate of the opposite side of the city walls. Bucephalus hoped this walk would bring peace, for while he did not understand why they were there, he could grasp the severity of the situation. Whatever Alexander had planned sadly did not come to fruition, and they returned to base camp. The following morning, Bucephalus awoke to a familiar thunderous sound. The siege engines were complete and hauling boulders at the walls. This time, other Macedonians also built battering rams and siege towers as well to assist. Under the sustained attack, the defenses held for quite a while to the surprise of all. After several days, the city's army rushed out again, this time many more in number. They quickly began surrounding and slaughtering the Macedonians to the horror of both Alexander and Bucephalus. Knowing stillness would spell doom, Bucephalus took action and led the elite infantry out of the encirclement, turning to ultimately hit the attacking forces in their flank just like previous battles. This action changed the tide, and now the city soldiers were on retreat and ultimately hid back behind the walls. Further fruit bore from this action manifested that night, for the defenders retreated to the wall even further within the city itself and had abandoned the rest of the city. They had lit aflame much of what they surrendered, but Bucephalus was happy to see Alexander go out of his way to rescue every single living being he came across in the Inferno. Shortly thereafter, the rest of the city surrendered. Of Darius. Having a monopoly on the Aegean coast, they continued eastward now as the coast turned. They spent the first few weeks receiving the welcome of over 30 different towns. The sheer quantity of joyous beings, beautiful sights, and more made Bucephalus immeasurably grateful. They eventually made their way into the interior highlands to reach Salani, which after no bloodshed also opened their gates for them. Next was Cilicia back towards the south. When they crossed the mountains, Bucephalus looked in disapproval as he saw their forces burning their own crops. Thankfully, many surrendered, being caught out in the open, so the destruction was peacefully ceased. This easy victory led many of the nearby cities to also surrender and welcome them. Thus Bucephalus witnessed only joy in many more cities yet again. After continuing their march along the coast, word reached Alexander that the Persian emperor and his army were behind them, causing him to turn his forces around. A very foreboding sign, Bucephalus thought to himself. Eventually they met the army of Darius, the Persian emperor, at the Panaris River. This was the largest mass of beings Bucephalus had ever witnessed by far. Trapped in by the hills to the east and the coast to the west, there was no way past them that would be easy. The Macedonians began slowly marching forward. Both groups fired more arrows than any being could ever possibly count, and eventually the armies locked into a melee. Seeing countless dying, Bucephalus wished to act, and Alexander ordered him to lead a charge of elite soldiers across to the right side, only to be met themselves with many swords and shields. With persistence, however, they began pushing the Persians back. Once they were forced from the battlefield, they turned inwards and charged the rear of the central portion of the Persian emperor's army. This last push finally saw all the Persian army break ranks and flee. Bucephalus was grateful that he and his best friend were still alive, but the massive death brought significant sorrow to his heart. The genocide of Tyre. The next day they returned to their original path, into Phoenicia. City after city welcomed them, and Bucephalus saw Phoenician art as well as culture in all its beauty for the first time. Upon reaching Tyre, things changed, however. Bucephalus saw a walled island city close to the coast. He had been brave in their previous sea crossing, but an opposed sea crossing was something even he feared. Regardless, Alexander ordered the Macedonians to begin building bridges. When they got close to the defenders, after several days of piling up rubble to make a bridge, the defenders started firing upon them, hindering their pace of progress. The Macedonians had torn down the entire mainland portion of Tyre to do this already, and while Bucephalus did not understand the concept of homelessness, he could sense the sorrow of these people now permanently displaced. The progress was further slowed by attacks on the bridge builders from the navy of Tyre. So much death, and for what, Bucephalus wondered. Eventually, a mass of allied ships arrived, however, forcing the navy of Tyre to retreat. Close enough to return fire, the Macedonians built catapults on the bridge as it quickly progressed now, damaging the city walls. What ensued once the bridge had reached the island and the Macedonian army broke through the walls was even worse than the tragedy of Thebes. Once the soldiers of Tyre had all been slaughtered before them, every single living being in the city was either butchered or enslaved. An atrocity Bucephalus could not have even imagined before witnessing it. Bucephalus. Alexander wished to immediately make haste for Egypt the next morning, but so distraught with anger and grief, Bucephalus refused to move even an inch for several days, forcing the entire army to wait. Eventually, however, on the seventh night, they began their way to Egypt, with all cities warmly welcoming them in peace and giving Bucephalus a tad bit of joy while he tried to refine himself after what he had witnessed. He saw many new beings, cultures, and landscapes on their way through this region Bucephalus had never seen before. The lands of Egypt had the greatest mass-scale building projects in the world at this time, and Bucephalus was struck with the awe of the scale and beauty of it all. Eventually, after countless cities warmly hosted them, left past the Nile on Bucephalus to the Siwa oasis in the desert. The landscape's heat and arid nature tested each of them to their core, but after several days they reached the oasis where a famous temple lay. Unlike times past, this temple's entrance was large enough for Bucephalus to accompany Alexander and witness the religious practices within. As the priestesses began singing words he did not know in the room they found themselves in, Bucephalus stared in awe at all the estranged and wondrous things around him. Beautiful paintings and carvings of everything both imaginable and unimaginable. Glittering gold, lovely smelling smoke, beautiful architecture, and more. Closing his eyes after taking everything in and looking within himself, Bucephalus began to feel something in his conscience. Before him began to appear a beautiful spectral horse. It looked to him and conveyed the message. I am the manifestation of your understanding of all your kin you have seen, those of your past and those of your future. I am not of material form, and thus cannot enact any will to bless the world. However, I host insights of your future to share that you would not elsewise be privy to. Not only are you blessed with life, but it shall continue to be an overall joyous life for the rest of your days. You will witness more lands, beings, and miles than the entirety of your life to this point combined in the journey to come. You will pass peacefully in your sleep at a very old age, having witnessed more of the world than any of your kin before or since. A life truly well lived. For your love and deeds, your memory shall live on eternally, O beloved and wise Bucephalus. Lecture 38. On collective action. At the core of why religious organizations are in general more effective at organizing charities, food drives, and so on is collective action. It is far more difficult to ask for aid from one person alone than it is to ask for that person amidst a room of people that have already volunteered to sacrifice their time and resources towards a cause. We as individuals understand that spending our resources alone merely leaves us more vulnerable than those around us, and is unlikely to change the world if done only single-handedly. However, when we see others making these sacrifices themselves, it makes us more likely to join in, as we are no longer required to be the sole bearer of the loss of this time/resource to be sent to where it is most needed. It also exponentially increases the momentum behind a cause, as many people's resources combined can far more easily change the world than any individual. Lecture 39. The Nature of Good and Evil. Despite what many faiths insist, good and evil were not created by some divine being or act. Thus, the countless time spent wondering why good and evil were made or allowed by a good deity is for naught, as good and evil are not things of creation nor material parts of our universe in any way. There are no good or evil particles, for example. What is good or evil is more akin to lenses we view the world through. In other words, good and evil merely exist as personal categories of perception. This makes many uneasy, for they believe if no ontological good or evil truly exists, it is better for the public to pretend one does anyways, for they fear chaos and disorder as inevitable for any society that accepts the truth. However, they are wrong to do so, for general concepts of good and evil need not literally exist to be deduced and widely agreed upon. Indeed, positions condemning things like murder, genocide, etc. can be reached purely through logic and reason alone without being laws ordained by any divine whatsoever. It only takes our minds to put ourselves in the shoes of other beings and understand they likely fear death and feel pain as we do. Thus, logically, if you do not wish to create an environment where you could be hurt, you ought not start hurting others. If we accept the reality that we only have one life to live and there is no experience after death, it is incredibly obvious why indiscriminate killing of life should be categorized as an evil act. For nearly all things perceived as good and pleasant can only be achieved when alive, Thus, if the heavens are understood as a concept of an existence of purely good things, then reality suggests life is the closest thing in our universe we have to the heavens. Taking this gift away from someone indiscriminately is very clearly highly condemnable. And we've easily reached this conclusion purely through reason. Lecture 40. Sacred Library Ranks and Texts. One should not seek higher ranks for material gain, and any who do so will find their attempts in vain, as there is no material gain to be had. No clergy receives any income from the temple. One should only seek these higher ranks if they wish to carry more responsibilities at the temple and deepen their studies. For these ranks are not determinative of moral righteousness or benefits in any way. They are merely aligned with how many responsibilities one has in the community during their free time. To discourage a sense of our communities we build being disconnected from all other peoples of different lives and beliefs, there is no such thing as an outsider to this community. Anyone, regardless if they have never heard of us or do not participate in our community, is the rank of friend. If one wishes to be a practitioner, which is one rank above this in responsibility when in the community, then one simply needs to morally agree with the 10 tenets. It is okay if you merely desire these moral positions, but do not put them into practice in your daily life yet even. As with the previous 2 ranks, of course, if one wishes to attain higher ranks in the temple's organization, there is no financial requirement. One merely needs to spend the time studying several texts of writers of our past that discuss philosophy, science, and mythology. This is both to uphold historical preservation, as making these books more widely read helps keep them from being lost to time, as well as come to an even deeper understanding of principles we advocate for: universal rights for all beings, both human and animal, anti-young earth creationism, etc. As of now, there are 22 books on this list of texts. I'm currently working on more, of course, and these books I have personally found inspiring for my writing and contemplating, so I hope they may be of equal or even greater value to all others who read them as well. This list is divided by half into groups A and B. One should aim to complete Group A first, and my suggested reading pace is a light 4.08 pages per day on average, which will get you through all of these texts in a year. If one wishes to finish these at a faster or slower pace, that is up to their personal discretion. This is merely the pace I found most comfortable. These 11 Group A texts include Phaethon, Tantalus, Tales of Troy, Odysseus, A Brief History of Time, Thunder Perfect Mind, Orphic Hymns to the Greek Gods, the Baal Cycle, the Motsa, the Last Tantalides, and the 7 Against Thebes. Once one has completed these texts, they should have a chance to freely present their thoughts on them to all other temple members above practitioner rank, regardless of their thoughts or lengths of them. This is for many reasons. First off, it is important to always hear the perspective of a fresh set of eyes, so to speak, as sometimes people not deeply wrapped up in a particular study can come to more revelatory answers than those who are. Secondly, giving equal respect and interest to everyone's voice, regardless of seniority, helps create a better atmosphere for equality and welcomeness. As I can attest personally growing up, there was nothing quite as validating that filled me with joy than when I was taken seriously by adults when I was in elementary or middle school, and I would talk about sports, geography, and paleontology. All others unequivocally have a right to experience the same joy in their lives, and we should strive to provide a space in this context for just that. Lastly, while no one should be graded for what they choose or how much they say on a text, having at least one thing to say about each text, even if it's as arbitrary as they like the chapter titles, helps ensure no one falsely claims they've read all of them and ascend rank without doing so. This is not based on the belief that those who read the text are somehow morally better or anything like that, but that it is unfair for those who don't read the text to achieve the same thing as those who do read the text without any of the time sacrifice. The whole point here is to put historical preservation and studying deep questions into practice. The act of sacrificing your time on this earth to read the words of those lost to us is the praxis. Once one has completed Group A and spoken about their personal insights, they become the rank of sage. If they wish to ascend ranks further, they would then dive into the other 11 texts. Much like Group A, if you wish to read this at a faster or slower pace, that's totally acceptable, but I found a cozy pace of about 5.17 pages per day on average to be the most compatible with my free time. This will get you through these 11 mostly bigger texts in 2 years. Group B includes A Declaration on the Nobility and Prominence of Women, Melinda Panha, Arzak, Hesychi Alexandrini, Gisophian, the Acts of Peter and the Apostles, the Greek Magical Papyri, the Derveni Papyrus, the Minoan-Mycenaean Religion, and the Manichaean Codices. After these are completed, and again they have given their insights to a council of folks above the practitioner rank, they ascend to the responsibility rank of priest/priestess. Lecture 41. The Old Gods as Echoes. So what purpose can old gods serve if they only are used as mere personifications and not divine beings capable of divine intervention? Well, many, for our human minds are far more specialized in understanding events from a human emotional perspective than a highly technical and literal perspective. It is difficult to have a deep connection for many with such impersonal concepts like quantum entanglement or gravity waves, for example, without giving them a personified representation. It is important we build a love and understanding for all things in our universe, because only ignorance can lead to hatred, mistakes, and general confusion. There is no one correct way to do this. For example, I don't believe it is necessary every individual in existence have a personification of music, nor that we will all have the same old god representing it if we choose to do so. What you wish to personify and with which deity is entirely up to your discretion. If one wishes to go deeper with this connection of love and understanding, one may even hypothesize that the names of these deities in the past are actually names of the countless beings in the past cycles of the universe. For example, I like to theorize that there were 11 previous cycles, and the most recent cycle, the Gisophian, had more ways of interspecies communication than our own. Thus, if you use Artemis as a personification of any concept, you may hypothesize that there was a living individual in this past universe also named Artemis. Personifying impersonal concepts also gives us more avenues to incorporate our appreciation of these concepts they personify into our lives. For example, if you're a meteorologist for your full-time job, you may wish to take a break from studying and looking at the weather, but you still in some symbolic way want to keep your occupation at the forefront. Consider drawing or reading myths about Zeus, for he is closely connected with meteorology, being an ancient Greek deity of lightning. Lecture 42. On the Creation of the Universe Cycle. As we can objectively confirm via various scientific fields, evolution is very real and the universe is billions of years old. Anyone who contests the universe itself or the Earth was created in a brief period of time by some divine force simply isn't correct. The only creationist talking point that isn't obviously debunked by tested science is their claim, quote, "If matter cannot be created or destroyed, then who created that matter in the first place?" End quote. While the retorts to this question may be less obvious at a surface glance, there are in fact many. First, just because science doesn't have a universally agreed upon answer yet on where the material of our universe originates before the Big Bang, that doesn't mean the answer must necessarily be from a pre-existing divine. It simply means we haven't come to understand this yet collectively. But so long as we do not go extinct in the next few hundred years, we inevitably will find an answer for this in time, I believe. Secondly, while I myself do not understand physics on a high academic level to come to a full understanding of what each paper I've come across says at all points, I do know there are several theories that attempt to answer this question that do exist. For all we know, someone may have already proposed the correct answer, and we just haven't all agreed upon it yet due to the lack of data. Third, it ignores the very real possibility there was no creation of this material, so to speak, and that what makes up our universe, while not taking its current forms of course, has always existed. Fourth, it ignores the almost inevitable fact we may not likely be the first cycle of the universe. Science indeed holds that matter cannot be created or destroyed in our universe, but this statement says nothing about such laws holding for past universes. What we have as far as ratios of matter, antimatter, dark matter, etc., may be what is left behind after one or several past cycles of the universe enacting both creation and destruction of those things. Lastly, it ignores the possibility that me and many other like-minded people in history would consider almost obvious from our philosophical perspectives, that the universe itself is a divine thing in some way, and thus saying our universe must have come from a God's creation is like saying God itself must have been created by an even higher divine. While none of these individual retorts are universally ironclad, in combination they make a more than adequate debunking of this creationist retort about matter not being created or nor destroyed. Lecture 43, on political participation. This group does not condemn participation in politics. In fact, it outright encourages it. For while those with a seat at the table may seldom, if ever, get their way, those who don't even take a seat in the room don't even have their voices heard. However, always remember, if your efforts start and end at the voting booth, whatever cause you are advocating for is inevitably doomed to fail. Protests, boycotts, and so on are key tools towards enacting positive change in the world, and thus we should not hesitate to add these methods towards aiding the causes we advocate for. Lecture 44, The Three Isles Myth. There were 3 islands in the sea, each inhabited and isolated from the rest of the world. All 3 had similar climates, flora, fauna, geography, population, and technology at the beginning. Instincto is the northernmost island. Its people chose to follow their instincts at all times, killing creatures whenever one simply desired to taste their flesh, and altering the landscape to whatever they desired at the moment. This rapidly increased their armaments and population, but at a massive cost. In 1 year, the island's megafauna went extinct. After 10 years, the forests were all gone as well. By 100, the island had become entirely barren and uninhabitable, thus forcing its people to flee to the central island. Telledi is the island in the center. Its people took whatever they wished from the environment, much like the previous group, but only on certain days of celebration in the year, rather than every day. When the people of Instincto arrived, the island of Telledi had already lost its megafauna and forests, but had a stable population thanks to extensive agriculture. This new population influx pushed the environment beyond its limit, and 100 years after the arrival of the people of Instincto, Telledi itself had also become barren and uninhabitable, forcing both groups to flee to the third and southernmost island. Caneas is the name of this final island, and its people during these first 200 years had never felled a single tree nor killed a single creature. Thus they were the least populous and armed of these 2 new groups of people who came and began to drain whatever they could from the island. However, the Caneas people had not been idle during these 2 centuries and had gained the highest knowledge of the way of the natural world of all 3 groups. Having heard the history of these 2 groups and possessing deep wisdom of the natural world, they fled all the way back to the northernmost island, Instincto, which had been untouched by human hands for over 100 years at this point. This proved to be the right decision, for the other 2 groups would ultimately drive themselves extinct and make Caneas barren as well. Since these groups did not possess deep understanding of the natural world, they believed the previous 2 islands were forever uninhabitable. But the people originally from Caneas knew that when we step out of the way, nature and time heals all things. They had brought with them many animals and seeds, for they knew the land had likely begun the first steps of the healing process, with mosses, grasses, and shrubs returning naturally, yet it could use a boost in biodiversity to accelerate the process. This they did, and after successfully rewilding the land that they lived on this new island, happily ever after. Lecture 45, Why Life Was Created. Before life was the ultimate era of misery and metaphorical death in the universe. For no birds sang, no art could be created, no journeys could be had, no love or joy existed, and there was no understanding to be held. The material of the universe still coalesced into stars, planets, and more, but all these things were seen by none and all for naught. For what reason should the beauty of space and its laws exist if none bear witness to it? What point is there in the universe existing if no one could bear witness to its existence? The quandary and subsequent misery it brought was so potent that even the universe itself, which by all accounts is itself not a living being or sentient being, created living beings out of dead pure material with the aid of never-ending, powerful marching of time. This being done purely within the laws and limits of the universe created by only material itself, and thus life is bound by the same laws as this material. All suffering in the world is not a sign of a devil or evil creator. Rather, all suffering comes from the limits of our creator, the universe itself. We were created by something that is, in many ways, effectively dead. Therefore, the fact we are alive at all affirms that life itself is the highest-ranking being in the cosmos. Much time is spent pondering why we have supposedly found ourselves lost from a purely good origin, but this question is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of time on the scale of the universe. For again, our origin was of dead, unliving material, thus over time we have actually been ascending towards pure joy rather than descending into evil. By creating life, not only did the universe itself accomplish an act worthy of anointing it a divine being, but it created beings that are divine themselves. For life itself can continue the mission of creation, to witness the universe around us, understand it, and fill it with life, started by the universe, but unlike dead matter, can do so with intent. Through cooperation of the laws of dead material and living beings with intent, life has continuously evolved upon our forms. In other words, evolution is the result of the intersection between the laws binding matter, which governs all things, and the free will of life. We ourselves are constantly creating things in our minds and changing the world around us. We ourselves are thus divine. While yes, living beings are capable of terrible deeds, the universe before us was even worse. For life had not returned the favor of creation by making love, art, community, understanding, or our concepts of even the gods themselves. Yet now we inhabit a world which, thanks to the achievements of our ancestors, has all of these things and many more. This is why life is divine, for only life itself can conceptualize an afterlife, enact change with intent, have divine experiences, or give existence any purpose.